Hello, everyone. My name's Graham. I'm creative director and wearer of many hats at Thisaway. I'll start, I think, by just giving you a little intro into us as an agency. Hopefully, that won't take too long, and then we can get into what you've tuned in for and get into the Team GB project. So. We are a branding agency based in Bath here in the UK, for those who are maybe joining from outside the UK. And what you can see on the screen now is our modus operandi, really, guiding brands through bold change. So what we mean by that is, clients usually come to us when they're looking to change something. It could be evolving their existing brand. They could be starting a new brand from scratch. They could be launching a new product. We often get the odd campaign comes through the door, but essentially people come to us when they're looking to change something in their business. And, we work closely with those brands. We build good relationships with them. It's often, as you probably know, with branding, it's often a fundamental change to that business. It's quite important, and it's a high priority for the business. So we just like to kind of build really good partnerships with them and guide them through that process to ensure they get to where they need to be strategically and everything else that comes with that, kind of visually, and make sure that their comms are on point. But most of our work ends up coming through recommendations because people are happy with the job that we've done, and it's those kind of relationships that we like to try and foster with our clients. Most of the branding projects that we get, we follow this process, which is, like I say, it's a bit around the journey that we go on with our clients, and it looks like this. It's kind of map, explore, and arrive. So the map stage is probably the strategic side of things, and this is where we do brand interviews with stakeholders of that business. We do workshops. We speak to clients of that business, all with the idea of trying to get some key insights and brand truths from that business that we can then use to build a brand idea and a brand positioning and platform around. Once we've got that idea at the heart of the business, we then move into the explore stage. That's usually the creative phase. It's where we're looking at the visual and verbal identity, looking at creative concepts, tone of voice, messaging, and how we bring that brand idea to life across the brand's channels and across its touch points. And then the arrive stage is usually when, we start to make things real. We'll have a set of brand guidelines, but, we might be building digital assets. We might be building a website. In some case of our clients, in the sports world, we've actually created things like trophies. But essentially at that stage, it's bringing the brand that we've created to life, activating it, and making sure that it's usable and practical for the client as well. So I think today it's probably going to be the first two stages that I'm going to try and focus on, the map and the explore. Main reason for that is because, I imagine most of you have been on our website and had a look at the case study, and you've probably seen the work. So hopefully what I'm going to take you through now is how we got there. And yeah, hopefully that'll be interesting to you. We work across a range of sectors that are very varied. Our last project was in the fertility sector for Engaged MD. We do work with social enterprises, tech startups, charities in the beauty sector, financial sector. But we like to think around the way that we approach branding, and our thinking applies to any sector that we're working on. And I think we're keen to take the learnings that we learn in different businesses, because we can also bring them into our thinking, across the board. But, the sector that probably gets most of the attention for us as a studio is the work that we've done in sports branding. It gets the attention because it's, by its very nature, it's just more high profile. They're household names. They're kind of names of what the man and woman on the street has heard of, and they're just highly visible. Our work for Brentford Football Club, now a Premiership football team. You know, we've rebranded the Grand National, which is, you know, an annual event here, horse racing event here in the UK. You know, our work with England Rugby over the years and the United Rugby Championship, you know, they've all kind of given us a very good profile. And, you know, it is a, you know, we, like I say, we work in a lot of sectors, but it is a, you know, it is an area that we do really enjoy. And I think one of the reasons for that is because sports branding is unlike any of those other sectors that I've just been talking about. You know, it has a really passionate audience, mainly due to the fact that, you know, these are relationships that are forged with, you know, often from the day that you're born. But, you know, these clubs and these sports brands have heritage that go back hundreds of years. And all of the stuff that comes with that means that, you know, they're often highly charged projects to work on. You know, a lot of audiences in the sporting areas kind of, you know, are resistant to change. And you know, over the years and with our experience in working it with them, you know, we've developed quite a thick skin, because, you know, things have drawn criticism. But, you know, I think it's like I say, it's just something that we enjoy working in. You could argue that, you know, this resistance to change from a lot of the audience is something that potentially, you know, holds the sports sector back. But again, that's maybe something for another talk, Chris, on another subject matter. But I think, you know, our approach when we're working with sports brands and across the board really, but especially with sports brands, is that, you know, we have to find an authentic and original truth. You know, the fans and the audiences will call bullshit if it's not something that resonates with them. So that's what we aim to do. We aim to make that truth as engaging and compelling as it can be, and communicate it clearly and uniquely, turning every touch point into an experience, and making every fan an advocate. So again, I think it's, you know, across most of the brands that we work on, we want those insights to be from a place of truth. But, you know, people will throw rocks at this stuff in the sports world, and we just need to be sure and confident that our idea is grounded in that truth and in that insight that's really relevant to that business, institution, club, whatever it might be. So, you know, the project that we're going to talk about today is, you know, it's in this world of sport, and it's Team GB, as you know from Chris's intro. So, you know, this has been an amazing project for us. I think we won it towards the end of 2021. And then we worked on it all the way, you know, most of the way through last year, and then we launched it earlier this year. It's got us some great PR. It's got some great profile for us as an agency. It's done well in some awards, whatever you think of design awards, but we hope it's done quite well. We hope it's going to win a few more. But I think what I want to do today is just like get under the bonnet a little bit and show you how we ended up, where we ended up, and the journey that we went on with the clients. So for those that maybe don't know or are not familiar with Team GB, Team GB is the external facing brand which is owned by the British Olympic Association. So it's 100% commercially funded, and basically its job is to unite, organize, and prepare athletes from all the Olympic sports disciplines and all of the different governing bodies that we have here in the UK, to get them together to compete under the union flag. And as part of our strategic phase and as part of the marketing research that we were given by the clients, you know, Team GB is a much loved brand here in the UK, so much so that we were given a survey where it was ranked second, just behind the NHS, in a survey of what makes people proud of Britain, even above things like the army. So, you know, no pressure there for us. Don't mess it up, basically. But yeah, it's been a brilliant project. But so the brief itself, when we got it, it was, you know, it's quite a multifaceted brief, to be honest with you. I think one of the main things that came out of it was, you know, ahead of the Paris Olympics, which is next year, which hope everyone kind of knows, but if you don't, Paris Olympics, the Olympics are in Paris next year, 2024. And ahead of that, I think the BOA and Team GB wanted to refresh the brand. It needed to appeal to a younger generation. The market research that we saw showed that the actual average age of the audience for Team GB was 38 to 45-year-old men. And we needed to change that. We needed to get it younger. We needed to diversify it a lot more. And appeal to the younger generation, especially given that, I'm not sure many of you know, but in Paris next year, there's going to be breakdancing, there's going to be new in the Olympics, climbing, skateboarding, surfing. So with all that, all that's going to appeal to a lot younger audience. So we needed to reflect that in this new brand. Other things that they were looking to do as part of this brief was strengthen their relationships with commercial partners, because obviously they're 100% commercially funded. And there was also a kind of a little bit of a brand architecture job to look at in terms of some of their like sub-brands that they had, like I Am Team GB, One Team GB. And I'm not going to go into that too much today, purely because we don't have a load of time. But that was another part of the brief that we had to consider. So if we think back to our process, we were getting straight into the mapping phase now. So we began by speaking to key stakeholders across the business. So we spoke to people within Team GB itself, from the CEO to the commercial team, the marketing team, staff all across the business. And then we also began to speak to, commercial partners. So Adidas are their kit sponsor, National Lottery obviously fund a lot of athletes, UK Sport, GoDaddy, Aldi are a big sponsor. And we spoke to them all just to try and to understand why they back Team GB and why they like to be involved with them. And we got some really nice insights out of that. We also spoke to athletes as well. Eric Boateng, the basketballer, Joel Furran was a sprinter that then went on to compete in the bobsleigh team. So he spanned the summer games and the winter games. Tom Barras was a rower, and Susanna Townsend was a medal-winning hockey player. And it was really interesting speaking to them. These are, there's a number of kind of different statements and quotes here from various stakeholders. And, this is probably a slide that's a summary of about the 50-slide deck that we went back to them with, showing what people have said about the brand. And the general consensus was that the brand was loved. Everybody loves Team GB, but I think there was a bit of confusion around what do they actually stand for. There was a feeling that they're too focused on the elite athletes and probably too focused on the 2 or 3 week window of the Olympic Games itself, and not so much on everything that comes outside of that time. And I think there was just a perception that they need to do and say more, and have a point of view on the world, and that was really lacking. So the 3 key challenges that we took out of that brief, and what I want to kind of go through with you all today. So I think the first one was that the brand needed to broaden its relevance outside of games time. The second, there was a disconnect between the brand position and the visual and verbal articulation. And the third one was more around the identity being more memorable. But I think overarchingly, what we wanted to do was just increase awareness for and an affinity for the Team G brand itself. As I mentioned, we needed to get fan engagement up and diversify that audience, and maybe get more eyeballs on the social platforms and some of their digital content. And then we also needed to also inspire and engage the athletes that end up going on the journey with Team GB. Make them feel proud to be part of it, and not just when they get to the Olympics themselves. And then, as I said, there was a real commercial need as well, to get money in and to get partners involved, and engaged with the brand to drive revenue. So we'll start with the first point here, which was massively key, to be honest, because you know, if you think back to some of those quotes that I had on the screen there, you know, we spoke to one stakeholder, and you know, one of the questions was like, why do you get out of bed on a morning? And he was like, well, you ask me why I get out of bed in the morning. If I'm being honest, we only get out of bed every 4 years. And it was a big thing that, you know, it's great for 2 years and everyone's into the athletes, everyone's keen on the sports and learns so much about the different sports. But outside of that time, there's real fallow years, and, you know, we don't hear much of Team GB, despite there being a kind of a 2-year alternate Olympic cycle between the Winter Games and the Summer Games. We just needed to give them a lot more relevance outside of games time, and it was something that they really weren't doing. And when we actually sat down and thought about it, you know, in this mapping phase, you know, we thought about it in terms of, you know, at the heart of the brand lies one of the most time-honored story archetypes. And we called it the hero's journey. And I'm hoping this reference is of you guys will have seen it. I know it's a bit of an older reference, but hopefully you guys have seen Star Wars. Yeah, we just thought there's a real nice parallel there. You know, the different stages of the hero's journey. You know, stage 1, you have the awakening. That's kind of in the context of Team GB. That's where, you know, you realize you've got a talent for something, or someone tells you you've got a talent. You're a really good sprinter. You're great at equestrian, or something like that. You know, there's a recognition there that I've got something here, and, you know, I might want to do something with it. So you step into stage 2, you cross that threshold, you know, you join a team, or you start competing in that sport or discipline that you know, that you've got this talent in, and you get better and you get better and you get better. And then, you know, stage 3, you hit the road of trials. You know, things go wrong. You know, you'll hit problems, you'll get injured, you know, you might go through a lack of form, you might miss a qualification or something like that. You will, you know, you hit some bumps on the road, essentially. But then, you know, if you get past them, you know, hopefully you get to a point where, you know, you achieve your goal. You know, in the terms of Star Wars, we've blown up the Death Star. You know, you win an event, you know, you might not, you know, you might just hit a PB, personal best, or you might go to the Olympics and win a medal. But you achieve a goal, and then, you know, you come back, and if you've won a medal, you get, you know, you're on an open top bus, or if you hit a PB, you'll go back to your coach and you'll be really pleased. But this cycle is essentially, this hero's journey is a metaphor for the Olympic cycle. You know, and I think that's what we were saying to them as a client, is you've got so many compelling and rich stories to tell, but at the minute, you know, you're just not doing it. And it runs, you know, straight away from the beginning, you know, once an Olympic Games is finished and you start preparing for the next one, all the way through till we get to the next Olympic Games, and then, you know, it's the virtuous circle, and then it starts again. So we just thought this was a great kind of concept and idea to, you know, to inspire and encourage the athletes, to get, you know, support and inspire the next generation of athletes, and to also, you know, just get the nation behind these heroes, and, you know, try to get them to feel like they get to know them a little bit more. And, you know, it was even, we talked about it in terms of, you know, reality shows. And one of the younger stakeholders we spoke to give the X Factor example. You know, they were like, the X Factor final or the Strictly final, they were like, it's the most boring episode of the show. It's like, you know, everyone's good. What you want to see is the shows before that, when the people are a bit crap, and, you know, you have a good laugh at some people or something like that. And it's the cycle. You know, it doesn't have to be this kind of, yes, the Olympic Games is brilliant and it's important, but some of these stories that you know, that need to be told on the lead up are really engaging. And I think that's what we really wanted the brands to do. So, you know, yes, they're a sports brand, but I think we wanted to just try and shift the mindset to essentially become more of a content brand and more of a media brand, and, you know, start to tell the stories of these athletes. So what we got here is probably the beginnings of like a really good content strategy, but we needed an idea to ground that in, and that's what we set about to do next. So we were looking to define what that idea can be at the heart of the business that informs everything else that we needed to do as part of this project. So if we go on to like the next challenge from the original brief, they had a positioning which they were quite happy with in the brief, and to be honest, originally it wasn't on the table to be looked at as part of this brief, but we did, which we do a lot with, we often challenge briefs, and we thought that it wasn't doing what it needed to do, especially in consideration of all of the things that we know this positioning needs to do commercially, creatively, and informing a visual identity. So we challenged it, and we said, that we didn't think that it was fit for purpose. So, where we usually get to when we starting to look to develop a brand platform, there's lots of different models out there, but this is one that we often use. So kind of call it what you will, a brand bullseye, a brand onion, whatever you want to call it. This is a lot of the time is what we use as a structure to develop a brand platform. And I think what we're passionate about is that, we think the best brands have a big idea at the heart of them. That really acts as a North Star for the whole business. So, internal stakeholders know what they need to deliver on day to day, and that brand idea, informs all of the comms and behaviors of the brand going forward. So, we look to do a few things. We look to get to that brand idea. We look to define a purpose, why we do what we do, what gets us out of bed in the morning. Then we look at a position, which is around about, how do we want people to see us? How do we want to position ourselves against our competitors? Then we look at some kind of proof points, why can we credibly claim we do what we do? Out of that, then often comes the personality. How do we feel? How do we sound? That usually kind of informs the tone of voice. But, they're all built out of this big brand idea, which, is how does this manifest itself as an audience-focused creative articulation? That's what we believe that we were looking to do. And when we looked at what we were given, which is what Team GB had right at the beginning, this is what they had. We felt it was a little bit convoluted, but if we think back to what we heard in our stakeholder interviews, staff weren't really using it. They couldn't really tell you what it meant. Commercial partners had seen it, but they'd seen it more of a strap line rather than like a brand idea and a brand vision. And again, it was the same with the delivery partners to a certain degree. But I think the big question that we had was, believe in extraordinary was the idea. But I think the way that we questioned it was like, who are we asking to believe in extraordinary? And we just didn't really think it was pure enough as a directional brand idea, and we thought it needed some work. So what we did was, you can see there's different elements of this this brand platform that they had. Essentially, what we looked to do was almost create a bit of a traffic light kind of system as for what we thought was good and was potentially working, just to kind of elements that we thought needed a bit more work, to other parts of the platform that we just didn't think were working. So, the vision, we thought it was okay. The mission of it hints at bringing together our country and alludes to, through the power of the Olympic values. That felt true to us, but I don't know, it didn't feel, is it more inclusive than being behind a team? I think our idea was that we wanted to take the mission and evolve it more into a purpose that could be, that could work both internally and externally. The values, they felt quite predictable, performance, responsibility, unity, pride, respect. I think you could put them on any sports brand. And so we really wanted to try and push them a little bit. Personality traits, again, were quite generic. We felt there was too many, and, is modern a personality trait? Not in our eyes. And the reasons to believe why they felt kind of true, in essence, you know, we just didn't really feel like you needed to state them in a brand kind of platform, because yeah, if you're not evidencing them well in your comms, then they're probably not working. So our idea was to either ditch them or replace them with something that can communicate this purpose or essence a little bit better. So our overarching feeling was that, yeah, you know, there is some good stuff in there, but, you know, if we need to deliver on all of these things that you've set out in the brief, we needed to move it on a little bit. And that's kind of what we looked to do. So we went away, we distilled all of this information, all of the insights down to the stakeholder interviews, and, you know, tried to separate them all out into themes. And we went back to Team GB with two brand positionings. I'm only going to show you the one that they ended up going with, just purely because of time. But essentially, you know, we boiled it down to this. This was the idea that we presented. So, you know, Team GB and the athletes it represents are the epitome of the Olympic values. We want to increase the bond that they have with the general public by shining a light on their stories, you know, talking about that, hero's journey, and evidence their humanity, celebrating the diversity and humility to inspire us all every day. And that's where we landed at, which if you've read our case study, you maybe know, but we landed on the idea of everyday extraordinary. So it is a little bit of a move on from believing extraordinary, but we think it's a significant one. Because everything that we heard as part of the stakeholder interviews, you know, it boiled down to basically a compelling observation that when the brand and the business is at its best, you know, Team GB helps and facilitates ordinary people to do extraordinary things. The big thing that we kept on hearing was that, you know, these athletes aren't on a pedestal like footballers are, like basketballers are in the States, or cricketers and rugby players are here. They are more humble. And, you know, this idea of ordinary people doing extraordinary things was what we felt made the brand so unique, and, you know, why people love these athletes, and, you know, the stories around them just were really compelling. And that's the kind of the idea that we landed on. So when we begin to break that down, you know, and what everyday and extraordinary means, you know, every day is, you know, it's every day. It's you know, it's grounded, it's unpretentious, it's honest, you know, it's human, it's empathetic, but then it's also every day. You know, it speaks to more than just games time. It speaks to the journeys, that hero's journey that we know all of the athletes go on. You know, it's not just this one-off event every 4 years. And it means that we can be topical and have a social point of view, you know, to speak about things like mental health and, you know, all of these other, you know, social topics that we feel the brand had permission to do, but it just never really did. And then on the extraordinary end, you know, that is more around kind of games time. You know, they are the exemplar, they're the best of us. They're the best of us as ordinary people, and they're going and they're competing at the Olympic Games, and they're achieving great things. But, you know, it is the inspiring and the motivating element of the brand. And I think, you know, what was also interesting was that, you know, the everyday side of it feels like the brand, but the extraordinary side of it feels like the product. That feels like, you know, these athletes competing, the elite side of it. We liked that kind of dovetailing of the two. So then, as part of our process, what we usually do here is, because obviously we're selling an idea into the client here, and, you know, as you guys are looking at it now, you know, you're just looking at some words on a page. And I think the key to showing how that brand can really come to life is by showing, you know, how we can use it as a basis and a springboard for some real creative thinking and some ideas. So what we do is, you know, we're still not jumping into the design, but we come up with ideas that show how this brand idea can come to life and how it can affect the behavior and the comms and the tonality of the brand going forward. So we start with just some, you know, just coming up with some sketched ideas. So, you know, with everyday extraordinary at the heart, you know, can their comms show the athletes giving thanks to, where they're from and the communities that, that have helped them. We can also tell these stories and maybe, not focus on the elite guys as much, talk about emerging athletes or people who are more, earlier in their journey, and really give them a platform to, to showcase themselves and to tell the stories that of getting them to where they need to be. Again, show the fun side of these athletes, to Instagram takeovers, things like that. Could we even film some content? I mean, one of the things that was really interesting that we heard from the stakeholder interviews was the fact that Team GB is a melting pot of people from different backgrounds. And, you'll have, I don't know, more of a middle-class person competing in equestrian sat at the Olympic Games next to a younger guy or from a council estate who's a BMXer, and there's just this melting pot of backgrounds, cultures, and, could we host a dinner party and film it and get these people talking? And I'm sure there'd be, it'd be an engaging piece of content. Could we have ideas where it's not just about the Olympic sport? Tom Daly, who's one of our best divers, is very much into knitting, and can we help tell those stories? Can we use other platforms, like in this case, a Spotify, something where athletes have their workout playlist on there, or playlist that they go out running to? Again, it's all kind of embedded in this idea of everyday extraordinary. And then even when we're thinking about it from a commercial perspective, they do have all of these, a lot of brand partners. One of them is Dreams, which, again, if you don't know who they are, is a company that sells beds here in the UK. But instead of just having athletes stood next to beds, can we talk about more of these kind of social issues, and talk about how sleep can benefit your mental health and it can improve your performance and things like that? It's just a slight twist on it, but it's a lot more engaging to audiences, we think. And again, balancing this everyday to extraordinary, can we have a portal where the elite coaches give tips that grassroots coaches, if you're a manager running a Sunday league team or something like that, can get tips from and learn from? Can we do the classic thing of, as a business internally, they get inspiring speakers to come in and speak to maybe the staff, maybe to the athletes. And again, even in the internal space of their offices, alludes to the time outside of games time and some of the milestones that build up, towards the Olympics. It could be things, that are linked to it, like qualifying or things like that, or it could be, other days like, like mental health day or something like that. But all of these things just come from that idea. Another one, can we bring the mindset of the athletes into the work environment? And finally, like, could they try and own, kids' sports days at schools and really kind of, like emphasize that as part of their brand? These are all ideas that, some of them they probably won't do. But what we always try and do as part of our process is show that, with a great idea at the heart of your brand and your business, this is how it can be informed and this is how it can be brought to life. So with all of that, if we go back to our platform, we essentially, we took feedback and, we landed at a brand platform that looked like this, where, our brand idea at the heart of everything that we do was everyday extraordinary, inspiring our nation through everyday people achieving extraordinary things every day. The purpose, the why we do it, to unite and inspire our nation to find their extraordinary. The positioning was the pinnacle of modern British sporting excellence and champion for the nation's well-being. And then, the kind of the brand truths we developed were inspiring, diverse, honesty, and captivating. And then the personality then, comes out of those. So if we're inspiring, we can be passionate. If we're dramatic, we can be captivating. If we're diverse, we can be inclusive. If we're authentic, then we're honest. And that led us to, what we'd also like to try and do is just write a bit of a brand manifesto. And again, this might not be, usually it isn't anything that's seen externally, but it just gives you a great idea as to what is meant by, which is essentially 2 words, in everyday and extraordinary, but it just kind of tries to give a bit of a summary about the brand. So at Team GB, we believe in the power of humanity, in the power of everyday people striving to reach the pinnacle of sporting prowess, that we and the Olympic values we represent can be the inspiration to unite our nation, to bring us together, regardless of who we are or where we're from, to be the very best versions of ourselves. And that's why we exist, to support and encourage our greatest athletes every day, helping them be ready and prepared come each games, to assist their journeys to greatness, but to also celebrate those unique stories and use them to help everyone find the enthusiasm and drive to get more from life too, whether it's human endeavor or heartache, laughs or gaffes, fears or tears of joy and pain. We tell these stories authentically and honestly and give our athletes a platform to do the same, to bring them closer to the communities they're part of and the places they're so proud of, because these are the stories that make our nation so special, a melting pot of cultures and backgrounds, all united by the power of everyday people achieving extraordinary things, uplifting the nation and inspiring all generations, not just during the games, but every single day. So Team GB, everyday extraordinary. So hopefully that's a good encapsulation of everything that we've took you through up to now. It makes them relevant more outside of games time. It gives them the permission to, not just talk about, the elite side of things and the performance side of things, the Olympic Games. We can talk about the everyday side of things, talk about how everyday people can achieve and be their best self. And this was the whole platform that we then used as the springboard to get into the brand identity, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. So with the identity, I think the trap that they were falling into is that, and it'd be interesting, to know whether you guys knew of the visual identity anymore. But from our point of view, people maybe knew what the logo was like for Team GB, but they probably couldn't tell you anything else about it. And I think that was the main issue, and they were also falling into a trap from our perspective anyway, where they were just trying to look like every other sports brand out there. And I think if you look at, this is just a light overview of where they were. They used quite a condensed, bold, uppercase typeface, which I think was Timmins. But it feels very kind of, I don't know, a little bit shouty, a little bit aggressive. It does feel very sports brandy, but there was issues with it when it was used at smaller sizes. But then even the use of the blue for us felt very dense. It also felt borderline corporate, if we're being completely honest. But I think the main takeout for us was that they look like all these guys, and I think when you look at the type styles, the graphical treatments, we deliberately put some of the Team GB comms in there because especially when you look at Team USA as well, similar colors, we really needed to pull them away from this, and I just don't think this was all done before they had everyday extraordinary. So we need to make sure that the idea of everyday extraordinary permeated all of the visual identity. So as part of our process, again, what we did was we took the brand platform of everyday extraordinary. We held a workshop with the team, and I think what we just tried to do was put everyday at one side and extraordinary at the other, and then just found loads of graphic design references and plotted them on that axis almost, to just see how we could make the visual identity go to each end of the brand strategy, really. And we also use it as a session to, they have an internal design team there, and we work with them closely throughout all of this project. But I think what we wanted to determine was, as well as to make sure that whatever we did was usable. There's no point in us doing a brand and then it not really being able to be brought to life beyond after, after we finished with it. And I think it's a trap that, a lot of agencies get into. But, we always try to make sure that any brand that we deliver is usable, and that when you actually see it out in the wild, it's going to look like how we intended it to look. So we use that session, like I say, to establish the kind of the differences between everyday extraordinary. And we came up with two initial concepts that we presented to the clients. And that's what I kind of want to show you now. So we called the first one journeys and journals. So again, this speaks to this idea of this hero's journey, the being relevant across the 4-year cycle. And I think what we tried to do with this concept was really put storytelling at the heart of it, for all of the reasons that I've already explained. But we wanted to kind of showcase the stories of everyday people living their day-to-day lives, as well as the athletes, competing at the highest levels. So with this, we kind of took inspiration from things like visual journals and diaries, training plans, things like that. But, we didn't want it to be all analog. We wanted to make sure it was digital. So we were looking at things, training apps. We were looking at Strava. We were looking at, Nike Run Club, all of those things that you do that to plot your journey as, as an athlete, or even as an everyday person just going out for, a 5K run. And so all of that kind of richness and reference points we tried to bring together into this route. And it looked a little bit like this. So again, the idea was to use multiple imagery, use and type in quite bold ways, but a real mix of type from, sans serif bold typography to kind of more of a handwritten typeface that, led itself, to be born out of this kind of idea of journals and that kind of thing. And then we also added a third typeface into the mix that was more of a monospace typeface that, felt like it gave that nod to, fitness apps and, the Stravas of this world. And you can see that here that we also looked at, at this stage, we were looking at potentially a logo change, and we had this idea of, could we make the lion to form more of a heart? So, it became more of a, a chest beating thing. And, we were told by the athletes that the lion of the logo really did mean a lot to the athletes. So, we were looking at, was there anything that we could do there? But essentially, that all led itself to, being applied across a range of applications. So, we're showing social channels, we're showing some, out of home stuff here. There's nice little ideas, as you can see, that we, if you know our case study, made it through to that, the start, the finish. We Are Team SE was a player, replacing the GB with the beginnings of a UK postcode. We had ideas of, athletes jumping over washing lines, things like that, to really bring the positioning to life. And, this was really liked. I think the storytelling element was appreciated. And it was definitely liked by the client. But we also showed another route. So we called this one the Fabric of Britain. So I suppose this one relates more to that concept I was talking about earlier of Team G being a melting pot of of diversity and different backgrounds. So we wanted to get across an idea of movement and emotion, and we thought, can we do that with patterns that can be used in different ways that feel energetic and have sparks of creativity to them. And I think what we wanted to do more in this route was make it feel a bit, I don't know, like not make it feel like those sports brands that we showed earlier in the presentation, where they are quite bold, they are quite imposing at times. And we wanted this one to have a lot more energy and potentially a bit more kind of friendliness to it. So we began by, just looking at creating some patterns that loosely kind of relate to the attributes of, that every athlete has, or that every person has when they take upon, competing in a sport. So we looked at how they might animate. We were looking at how they might become part of, a texture that we can add into imagery. And then, you know, we then looked at it more through the lens of then how they come to life. The patterns can be used in isolation. They can then be used to form, you know, a wider illustration system. And, you know, we're using different typeface here, something that has maybe feels a little bit softer, not as condensed, has a little bit more movement to it. And I suppose if you know the case study and the project, you can see that this was the basis of the route, how the brand ended up being. But the feedback that we got was that, you know, I think Route 2 was the one that was more liked, but you know, the client was keen to retain that storytelling aspect of Route 1. So what we kind of ended up doing was you know, we took most of the things that we liked from Route 2 and then just looked to get in this idea of storytelling. And it, you know, it became clear through multiple conversations that we had that it wasn't going to be feasible at this point to change the logo due to a lot of commercial situations and licensing issues. So we knew that we had to work with the existing line, which, you know, we were fine with, but we had to then kind of show how we could merge that storytelling with Route 2. And I think that's what I want to just go into and take you through now, is how the work that we had to do to end up with the final brand that we ended up delivering. And again, I think the everyday to extraordinary scale really did come in handy. You know, we use that as a basis for the identity refinement, making sure we work at this everyday end and that it could scale up to the extraordinary end. And we didn't just jump in straight into applications at this point. We just wanted to move things around graphically, try out different things to show how we could go up and down that scale. So we're not applying it to websites, social media posts, or anything at this stage yet. It's purely just to experiment with the identity assets that we had and help refine them a bit more. So, you know, we've kept that scale there up in the top left, and you can hopefully see how we begin to move through it. So at the everyday end, you know, more of a white background, minimal graphic assets. The pattern is used a lot more subtly, and we're using multiple images here to tell the stories, in this case of the BMXer Kai White, who's from Peckham in London. So on the athlete side, you know, this is Adam Peaty, one of our most decorated swimmers. So again, it's using that idea, instead of saying Team GB, of using his initials, AP. And the idea here was that, you know, we communicate and we tell the stories of the team behind the team, you know, his parents, his wife, his coach from when he was younger. But again, from an identity perspective, the patterns are still a lot more subtle here. Similarly, you know, not focusing on the elite athletes, talking about everyday people. It's a similar kind of graphic treatment. You know, we're using all of the three different typefaces, the sans serif, the handwritten, and the more monospace techie performance typeface. But you can see, you know, from an everyday person back to the athletes of the, you know, a day in the life of Dina Asher-Smith, one of our female sprinters, to, you know, more grassroots level, talking about, you know, a grassroots football team and using the postcode idea again. And we started just then you can see it's nudged up a little bit there on the top left, you know, talking about every people just trying to be, you know, their best self, you know, someone trying to lose a bit of weight or something before they get married. But, you know, we're starting to bring in the pattern is a bit more of a block color here, layered behind the imagery, slightly more bolder. You know, the pattern is increasing here, as well as the number of images. And again, you can start to see here, as we start to move up this slide and scale, we're using the patterns within imagery and using them as a subtle layer and behind that imagery on the left-hand side. You know, but it starts to move up that scale. We're bringing in some of the secondary color palette as a quite bold block of color, you know, moving it up to kind of being a full bleed background color, really bumping up that hero typeface. So it's a lot more bold in its application. And then again, the patterns become a little bit more busier, not just the kind of the standalone patterns. We're starting to integrate them into more illustrative, but still keep them quite subtle. But then as we begin to move up the levels, you know, the patterns become bolder and bolder to the point, yeah, you know, where the halfway point, we're using them as full background colors. we're using the type quite bold, in a bold way. And then as we edge closer to, what might be games time, maybe the art direction of the photography comes a little bit more aspirational. Maybe we can start to track out typography, but the patterns are still in there. And then we start to build this identity system up where patterns are used on imagery, type is used in, a lot more of the color. And, even showing when we get into the more hero level where we are talking more about these elite athletes, we can use the patterns in photography as cutouts to help tell their story. And, as we get into the real extraordinary end, the patterns become more and more prominent. We get more playful with the typography, playing around with typographic layouts. And, the patterns then, as we're getting up to this extreme end of extraordinary, become more prevalent. So what that hopefully gives you is, an idea of is that we have this sliding scale. So it means that when they're using this as a team, they can decide, right, is this communication that I'm going to put out more of an everyday communication, or is it an extraordinary kind of games time communication? And immediately they've got a bit of guidance there as to how that communication will end up looking, which we think, is going to be really useful for them. So, as we started to build into that, I'll go through these ones quite quickly, but, we made a slight tweak in the logo when it came to the color palette, just darkening up that blue a little bit. But what was lacking before was any real rules or guidance of how to use it. So, how to use it when it's a monocolor. We had to create guidance around the color palette we've developed and which mono logo that you use on which color. We also had, metallic versions of the logo. So we had to distinguish how and what colors they are used on. And I think even just thinking about things like, a horizontal version didn't really exist before. So we were developing things like that. And the one change that we probably did, even though we didn't change the logo purely in its form, we did look at how it would animate, and we created this kind of burst of the logo that, that ended up, integrating into the lion's mane. And it kind of just spoke a little bit to the way it bursts out to the, the shape of a Union Jack as well. And again, we're getting really into the detail now of an identity system, the rigor that goes into the color palette. We knew that we were going to have to deal with red, white, and blue purely because of the nature of the Union flag. But what we tried to do was push that as an idea as much as possible, so we could start to bring in really zingy blues, accent pinks, and really expand the palette out. So it gives us a great variety of colors in our armory. And it means that, we can create really zingy, engaging communications that might attract that younger audience that we want to attract, which is key to the brief. So, if you put all of these colors, having this many colors means that you've got issues of how they all work on each other. So we did a lot of work around that. We identified colors that maybe weren't working so well on some of the colors, and then took them out to form some creative pairings that we use these when we were creating out these illustrations or background colors. So this type of application, that some of which you've seen, but here we just shown the proof of our work, really, that they do work on each other. But like I said, they worked really well from a creative perspective, but in a real practical perspective, when they're used on typography, they started to feel really clashy. So we were conscious that, look, that's not really going to work. There's some weird color combinations there, and it's not great for accessibility. So we then began to look at, how can we adapt that color palette to make sure it's accessible, and again with our practical hat on, to make sure that it's fit for purpose and it's fit for use. So we narrowed it down to a selection of colors from our palette, using the darker, kind of richer colors, arguably the more premium colors on some points, but really, to ensure that we'd done our due diligence to make sure that they worked and that they were fit for purpose. So again, we're getting into guideline stuff, but we've got our creative pairings for when we're creating illustrations and graphic patterns, but we've also got our real practical color areas as well. And like I said, like as with the logo, you know, we had to make sure that the metallics worked well, because they would clash if they went on some of the brighter color options within the palette. So we made sure that it was robust enough to work on them. So, you know, we got to the point where, you know, a lot of work went into identifying that color palette, to the point where, you know, we're really pleased with it. It's a nice interpretation of the red, white, and blue. And we, you know, also adding in that gold, silver, bronze, you know, was a nice thought, and speaks to the, you know, speaks to the Olympic Games itself. From a typography perspective, this was a big one, because again, you know, we knew that we wanted to move away from that condensed bold style and create something a little bit more friendly. But we were pretty happy with the typographic hierarchy of where we got to. We have a hero typeface, and we kind of have two supporting typefaces, one a handwritten one, and then the third one being this more monospace technical font. And when we were, you know, when we were playing with it, we liked how we could dial each one up, dial each one down. But we wanted to create a bespoke typeface for the brand to give it some unique and recognizability, which again was one of the key things as part of the identity brief. So at this point, we worked with a typographer called Lewis McGuffey. If you don't know him, check him out. His website's eastofrome.com. And he was brilliant to work with. And, you know, we identified a clear brief, you know, to stay away from the kind of obvious sports brand typography. And, you know, we wanted to really lead on, can we get some real authentic Britishness into it? And we started to work with him to look at, you know, what are the reference points for that? And we went, you know, we looked historically back at what are recognizable British typefaces. And, you know, this led us to go back to industrial period, looking at British grotesques from back in the day. And we started to develop a typeface that, you know, was in that world, really, you know, a typeface that had, you know, irregular widths in some of the characters, that, you know, started to have, yeah, like it just had some quirks to it that, you know, we thought could be quite nice to bring in, and that could give us a bit of kind of recognizability within our typeface. So we were starting to look at lighter versions, something, you know, some of the versions that you can see here, you know, all just trying to pull in, like, can we make it almost classically British in some way? And we got to a point where, you know, we had almost like a variable font that we thought was okay, but we didn't know whether, you know, variable font was right, whether there was too many weights and it could get confusing. But, you know, we started to push the character styles a little bit more. We were keen to get movement and agility into the typography. So hence, if you look at the shape of some of those A's and the R's, you know, yeah, they're a bit weird and they're a bit wacky, but we did quite like that. But I think where we got to was that we just felt it was a little bit too brutalist, I think, and it maybe wasn't as kind of accessible and friendly as we wanted it to be. So we began to look more at probably a stereotypical British typeface, you know, in the world of Gill Sans and typefaces like that, where, you know, they maybe aren't as brutalist as the previous option that we were looking at. Maybe a little bit lighter in terms of how they're cut, but again, they still have that little bit more roundedness, a little bit more friendliness to it. And, you know, we could still get some of that waviness into the kicks of the K's there, as you can see. But yeah, we started to kind of really like where this was going, and we felt it had the energy and the bounce that we were looking for. So essentially what happened is, you know, we took elements of, you know, this was probably a 2-month process or something, working closely with the client, and we ended up at, you know, where we ended up, where we had a version of the typeface that had an everyday element and an extraordinary element. The extraordinary element was more these weird kind of kicks of the K or the horizontals of the letter H. And we decided just to keep it to 5 weights rather than become a variable typeface, just because we thought it was probably more practical as well to use. But I think, you know, there's a lot of was a lot of scope in how we could get it to animate and that kind of thing. And then we got into more the last kind of elements, which was the imagery. Again, in a lot of the applications that I've shown, you can see how, as a brand, there's, that has to have a wider remit as Team GB. There's lots of imagery styles that we need to have. But again, we just used our everyday to extraordinary access as a way to kind of give some rules around how to use them. At the everyday end and the ordinary people end, we've got quite a reportage feel, showing people doing workouts, nice shots, nothing too contrived or convoluted, very much of an authentic approach to the photography. Even in applying that to the athletes themselves, showing them training every day, real world stuff, again, more of a reportage feel. But then as we move to games time with athletes, there is a bit more energy into it. There's a bit more focus on the subject matter. We can start to use them as cutouts and put them on coloured backgrounds. But, there's a nice kind of variety between reportage images and potentially studio shots as well. But all of them, especially in the reportage field, looking to capture a moment. So, we're getting into guideline stage here, but, kind of just giving some details of what's the right image, what's the wrong type of image. And I think the image on the bottom right is quite interesting of Max Whitlock. I think that shows, who's a gymnast, it shows how you can still have a cool studio shot, but it's not as contrived as some of this elite sports branding where it's harsh lighting, and again, you feel you're putting the person on a pedestal. So again, we've got that broad range of photography styles there, but again, with a nice, loose rule of when to use what type of imagery. And finally, just into the patterns, we began to refine these. As I said to you earlier, we wanted to create patterns based on the attributes of athletes, or that were loosely based around the attributes of athletes. And there was a load of work that went into these. I'm condensing it right down, but this is essentially where we ended up. And then it was just a process, again, working with the design team at Team GB to make sure that the assets that we gave them were fit for purpose and were easy to use. So for each pattern, we give them some guidance around how to crop it from a square crop, for Instagram or something, how to crop it from a landscape perspective, for some maybe out of home stuff, and then a portrait perspective, maybe for Instagram stories. So again, there was that clarity on how you use these brand assets, and to make sure that, everything that we do with this identity is on point. And then obviously we then needed to take these patterns to develop the wider illustrations. And again, what we did is we had quite a bit of fun with this, and we just started off drawing nice line drawings that we felt could represent certain disciplines of the Olympic sports. We've given the clients this initial set. The idea might be on the lead up to the games next year, we do more and more. But initially, this was the set that we gave them, and we did a lot of concepts of these line drawings, but ultimately, ended up here, which we were really pleased with. We think they've got an amazing amount of energy. They bring the color palette to life a lot, and I think these really have that iconic element to them, which I was talking about right at the beginning, where we hope that if you see something like that, even if it didn't have the logo on it, over time you will recognize it as Team GB. And that's kind of where we ended up with the finalized brand, which I think most of you have seen. We've got an identity that flexes between the everyday and the extraordinary. Whatever communication that we're doing, we feel there's good guidance there to help produce assets for this brand. We think it's going to appeal to that younger audience, and be kind of a lot more recognizable than it was if you think back to where they were. And yeah, you guys have probably seen a lot of this on our website, so I won't dwell on it too much, but we're really pleased with the flexibility of it, and and how it's been applied. It manifested itself in a pretty extensive brand guidelines document, some of the pages of which you can see here. And one of the things that we did once we finished the brand guidelines document, the social media team at Team GB give us a shopping list of social assets that they would like us to skin in the new brand. So that's what these are. And then we handed them over to the social media team so that they had assets ready to go. And, you know, hopefully there'll be more of these to come. But, you know, I think coming to the end now, but I think what we're most proud of, I think, with this project is how they have took the idea of Everyday Extraordinary and really ran with it. Since we've done the rebrand, you know, they've agreed commercial partnerships with, you know, Bird's Eye here, talking about non-meat and vegan alternatives, food alternatives. They've recently just signed a commercial partnership with British Gas. But from a content perspective, they've really embraced this hero's journey. And, you know, they've got content series called Undercover Extraordinary. One had Max Whitlock, the gymnast, going around Brixton Market. They've got a content series called Sporty AF, which means sporty and female, talking to some of their female athletes. And I think they've really just ran with it. And some of these things that we haven't been involved in at all, but I think what it really shows is that people understand it as a brand and as a platform, and other agencies are doing things with it. And we're looking at it and we're seeing it's all on point, and it's not, and it's in the brand that we envisage. So, you know, we're really pleased with that. As we lead up to Paris next year, we're working with them. We've done some work with them on branding the fan zones, which will be all across the UK, where you can go and watch the games when they're happening. And yeah, we hope to do some more with them as we step into 2024. But that's about it, guys. They were a great client. You know, I have to thank them. And yeah, and you know, it's me here talking about it to you today, but it was a real team effort on our part at Thisaway. And yeah, I just want to, you know, thank Adam Cale, Steve Owen, Laura Hiscock, Kevin Pearson, all were kind of a core team on this project. And then, you know, we had great freelance support by James Dunlevy, Harry Meakin, Aaron Hocken, and Sherilyn Dykes. You know, really brought their A game to this project as well. So yeah, that's it, guys. So I hope, thanks for listening. Thanks for your time. I know it's quite long, but there's a lot to get through. So yeah, hope you enjoy.